6,390 pages across 15 books isn't too bad. I had a really good August reading month. I listened to 35 hours of audiobooking. My biggest book was Citadel, which comes in at 957 pages, and my oldest book was Goodnight Mister Tom, which was written in 1981. I won't lie, I had a stressful end of my month because I did not read anything whilst I was away on holiday. No surprises there, but I set myself an amount to read whilst I was on holiday, and then also expected to read another 4 books in the week that I came back. So I then had to read all of the books that I hadn't read and the but I managed it, I did it, I'm very pleased. Need to not stress myself out quite so much, but let's dive into the stats. For the genres of the books that I read, I had 4 fantasy books, 3 mystery, thriller, crime books, 1 non-fiction, 2 memoirs, 2 historical fictions, and 3 sci-fis. For the nationality of the authors, I have 1 Irish author, 1 Kiwi author, 2 Australian authors, 5 American authors, and 6 British authors. And for the format that I read these books in, I read 1 book via ebook, which is not this one. This is the first book in the series. 2 books via audiobook, 2 books in a mixed format, this was a mixture between hardback and audiobook, 1 book in hardback, and 9 paperback books. The first book I read this month I don't actually have a physical copy of. This is the first book in the series, but I read Thorns Fire, which is the second book by Helen Scheuerer. Yes. In this series we follow an alchemist who also, while she's trying to learn this alchemy in a school, happens to be the heir of a very run-down area of land, but she is meant to be a princess in that land, her sister should be queen, and it's combining the political intrigue of that with some romance, because it is a romantasy, but also with the high fantastical elements of her learning alchemy, the world having alchemy as a possibility when they're having their fights, etc. And it's a really interesting world. Obviously these are big books, but I find them very quick to read through. The smut is smutting, so if that's your sort of thing, it's not mine, but I still enjoy the book, and I had a really good time with this one. But yes, this was a book break read. I'm definitely wanting book 3. Then I read Desolation by, I almost said Terry Pratchett, by Landy. This is the second book in the Demon Road trilogy. This is not linked to Skullduggery in any way. I will say it's not as good as Skullduggery, this series. I am still enjoying it, it's still just as quick to read. It's actually darker than Skullduggery because there's less humour. It's still there, but it's not as humour focused. And it's enjoyable, but it's not as good. I can see why he wrote this trilogy and then just went back to the Skullduggery series. But I am finding it intriguing, and this, gosh, I read the first book so long ago, and obviously I don't want to spoil anything, so we're following a young girl who, it turns out her parents are demons, and they actually wanted to eat her because that's how they continue their lifespan. And so she's like, well, what the fuck? Turns out she's a demon too, being the child of demons makes sense, but she didn't know that, she thought she was normal, and so she, like, escapes. Ta-da! For transparency, I read a book that I will not be mentioning. I do not mention the author on my channels whatsoever with any of their pseudonyms. I'm mentioning it just because I read 15 books and that was the 3rd one. I read it because it was gifted to me by my mother-in-law before she passed away from cancer. We used to bond over our former enjoyment of this author, and their atrocities did not come out until after my mother-in-law passed away. So I wanted to get it off of my TBR, but I am still keeping the book. It's just going to be hidden away. Yeah, it's a very confusing thing having it linked with the death of someone who I loved so much. For now it's just getting hidden away, and there's a book that I read. It was not that good. On a more positive note, I reread Goodnight Mister Tom by Magorian. I reread this on the spur of the whim because I mentioned to my dad that my uncle had read my favourite book, which is The Gift, the first book in the Pellinor series. But I didn't say that, I just said my favourite book, and my dad was like, oh, Goodnight Mister Tom? And I was like, Dad, dearest, you are a decade and a half more, almost 2 decades behind. This was my favourite book when I was 10. But you're not wrong, I did love this book, so I decided I would pick it up. And this was a really interesting experience to read it as an adult. I saw a lot of different things. I remember as a child thinking that Tom was so grumpy and so unwelcoming to Willie when he first moves in. If you don't know the story, we're following Willie, an evacuee from London who moves in with Tom, who lives out in the countryside, and he's like a grumpy old man, and they end up like opening each other's hearts. But I thought when I was a kid reading this that Tom was so grumpy, so unwilling, so like, I don't want to do this. And reading it as an adult, the same text, no he's not. And I just think that's fascinating to see the different perspective that you can have once you've lived an extra 2 decades. I'm getting old. Tom is withdrawn and is abrupt, but he's not unwilling to bring this child into his home, and he doesn't do it reluctantly. He does it knowing it's his duty for the country, and he adds extra care for the boy than he's supposed to. And it was very interesting to read that separate from the younger version of me that saw him as grumpy, and I think it's an interesting take on how children see adults' actions, because as a child, if an adult acted like this, I would assume they were grumpy and they didn't want me around, whereas in reality he just is a grump and he's actually quite happy to have this young boy around. So I just thought that was really fascinating. Everything else was pretty much as expected. I forgot somehow, there's a death in here, I will not spoil it. I forgot about the death. What? So that was a bit of a shock. I was like, I was remembering it as I was reading it, I was like, this is awful. But this was fantastic, 5 stars, no surprises there. I still love this book. Michelle Magorian wrote some fantastic kids books that are set around World War II, and this is most definitely one of them. And then my Discworld book for the month, and that is The We Free Men by Terry Pratchett. And this is including essentially the Picts, shall we say, and it's the first Tiffany Aching book. So it's the first one that my partner, who I've gotten all of these editions from, hasn't read, because Tiffany Aching was marketed, and is, as a YA series, and he's a grown man, and so he was like, oh, it's not for me. I am changing his mind. He is going to read them at some point. However, he hasn't, so I'm now reading Discworld that he hasn't read, and considering he has Discworld tattoos, that feels really weird. But I enjoyed this one. I will say that Becca from the Book Sanctum, just because this may be relevant for other people, said that the Scots is difficult to read. It's the Picts, these little guys, are written speaking in Scots, so if you're unfamiliar with that, then that's going to be difficult. She warned me of this. Thank you, Becca, but I'm half Scottish, so it was fine. I both read some of it physically because I wanted to see how the written Scots was, and also listened to the audiobook. I feel like if you struggle with the written Scots, you're going to struggle just as much with the audiobook, so you might be better with the written one, because the audiobook has them speaking in a Scottish accent, and you don't have the time that you can spend looking at the word that's written that comes from standard English, so I feel like you'll be better off with reading it physically if you aren't familiar with the Scottish accent. The Scottish accent. There's many, but you know, the Scottish dialect. For me, it was fine, and I was also, because I went to Scotland this month, that's where I went on holiday, I went to Scotland to go see my family, and so I was speaking to them a lot, organising things, and I'm laughing my head off because I've just had like my grandfather on the phone, and my grandpa's like talking about things and joking about things, and then I come and listen to the audiobook for this, and they're also joking and complaining. I very much enjoyed it. It's really fun. It is slightly more childish than previous books. Obviously it's meant to be, but it is still enjoyable and I had a good time. The Cutthroat Trial by S.J. Fleet is one that I was very curious to read because I've read 2 books of The Secret Varus's non-fiction previously, so thank you very much to Book Break for sending this one over. I did find this one to be quite an interesting read because it is very much written in a non-fiction style and is separated into each chapter is from a different point of view, and you get the points of view of the various defenders, the judge, and the criminals themselves, as well as the prosecutors, the crown, etc. So you get a viewpoint of everyone around. I will say, if I open up an early chapter so that no one gets spoiled, that I absolutely loved that it tells you every time, not just who it is, oh wonderful, it's Craig. Who's Craig again? The first defendant. It reminds you every chapter, because there's quite a few points of view in this book, who you are paying attention to, and I very much appreciated that. This had a very unsatisfying ending, but it's also quite realistic, and I thought it was very interesting. I think this is well written and I'd be curious to see more from them. Then I went for a nice easy read, Clariel by Garth Nix. This is the 4th book in the Abhorsen Sabriel Old Kingdom series, and this one is set back in time, and we go back prior to the other books that we've read to meet Clariel, who is the daughter of a gold worker who loves to live out in the countryside and just wants to stay there, but her mum is so good at gold working that she is moved to the capital city, and shit goes down and there's magic and darkness. We see Mosse trying to say things without spoiling, because obviously whilst this is a prequel, it's written well after the main trilogy. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. It's just as fast to read as I expected. I had a fantastic time. I'm loving this series, and I only have 3 books left of it on my shelves, so I'm very excited to carry on. Then my big book, Citadel by Kate Mosse. This is my read for one of the books that's going to expire by the end of this year, so I'm glad that I managed to get to this one, and I did not expect to cry. The other 2 books in this series are slightly shorter. This one's 957 pages, the others are 700 and 800 pages. But they also have more of both time frames, so the premise of this series is that you have 2 different time frames. One is more modern and one is more ancient, and they interact within the area in France of Carcassonne, and there's a little bit of magic, but it's primarily historical fiction. This one, the modern is the most far back in time that we've went. It's 1940s, World War II, and then the other time is like the 300s. Can I find something? August AD 342. Look at me remembering something. We get a lot less of the 300s, the old time, than we do in the others. Don't get me wrong, it's always smaller, but I feel like it was a lot less this time. And then with the World War II content, I learnt stuff that I did not know. As someone who knows a lot about World War II but has never really learnt much about France in World War II other than all the light we cannot see, this was enlightening to say the least, learning about the concentration camps and what it was actually like having the Nazis be in the country and be invading. This was really good, really well written. The ending, as I said, I was crying. I used to cry a lot more at books, and now I'm always in front of someone. I used to read alone in my room, and now I read in the living room, so I cry a lot less. So the fact that I still cried, and I am debating whether or not, like, I cried, so I want to give this 5 stars, but I've not had that feeling. I think it's me. I've not had that 5-star feeling yet this year, even though I've read amazing books. So I think I am going to give this a 5-star, and it massively changes what was going to happen, because I was like, yeah, the series is fine, but I don't need to keep it. And then I've given the final book 5 stars, and now I have a giant 3-book trilogy that's living on my shelves. God damn it. Then an audiobook buddy read with the folks over at Book Break that I did have to slightly elongate because of my trip, and that is Sociopath by Patric Gagne. Sorry, Patric. And this is a memoir of her time being a sociopath. It starts off when she is very young, does it tell me? She's like 6 or 7-ish, and it goes all the way up until the present day in her life right now. It is a very interesting book. The audiobook specifically, because that's how we were reading it for the buddy read. I will say she narrates it herself, and I love the extra expression that she's able to add in. So there's points where in the text it's just written normally and you have to assume any additional inflections, but she's laughing as she says it, or she's exasperated as she says it. She really utilises the ability of her reading the audiobook to add extra to the narration. So I really do recommend the audiobook of this one if you're going for it. I will say that I did find some sections of it difficult. The youthful sections I found much more realistic. Also the sections where she's discussing marital difficulties, I found those quite realistic, but when she was in a setting with her therapist and she's relating that, I don't know if it's because she has read so much literature on this topic potentially, but the therapist was speaking in textbook therapy speak, and no therapist truly speaks like that. I was playing this for a short period because I was on holiday with my partner, out loud on the speakers, and he could hear it too. And he has 2 degrees in the realm of mental health, psychology, etc. And he was a bit sceptical of both the scenes when she's in with the therapist and how that dialogue is being presented, but also her reactions as a sociopath. He felt like she was exaggerating and lying, which wouldn't be out of context for a sociopath, but would be unfortunate to do in a memoir. It was very, very interesting, very insightful, because with Patric going and getting a PhD in the topic, she obviously had a lot of knowledge, and so it was really interesting to learn how little there was in like the DSM and in other literature about sociopathy specifically, when it's clearly its own thing. So at least there's that now. So I had a very mixed experience with this. In terms of a work of art, as books are, the audiobook was very enjoyable and I recommend. I think this is as truthful as you're going to get from a sociopath. Then I was home and I was reading Walking the Bones of Britain by Christopher Somerville. So this is all about the geology of the British Isles from the very tippy top, I say the very tippy top, mostly the very tippy top of the contiguous British Isles, right down to London. So we start off at the Isle of Skye. I really should check this. Isle of Lewis, then Isle of Skye. So we don't go to Shetland, but we go to the Isle of Lewis and he follows, can I find the map? Follows a route down the UK and talks about the geology and how it changes. I know that that will not be of much interest to most people, but I will say the amount that he talks about the history of each location I really appreciated. A lot of these places have old mining communities, or they're from different manufacturing industries such as making clothes and cloth and sheep rearing, etc. He's in a lot of rural places for this, and he talks about the history of the area as well as the geology, because of course the geology that is present influenced what people were not able to do but were likely to do, because it was easier to, in some areas, raise sheep because of the soil that was there, because of the rocks that were underneath. So I really enjoyed that additional section of it. The geology, as far as I know, seems very accurate. It is not the easiest book to read when it comes to the geology. It's not the most friendly to an uninitiated geologist or just a regular person. There are photos, which truthfully I've not had the time to look at yet because I was so busy at the end of the month trying to get through my reads. So I'm just having a quick look at them now to see. They do explain some of the specific areas and they do show examples, but they're obviously not linked directly in the text. I say obviously, they're like in those little, you know, grouped together sections, so they're not interspersed within the text where you would need them to learn about the geology. So unfortunately this isn't the best for that, but it is very interesting, so if you're intrigued I would still recommend. Then for the final 5 books, these were all the ones that were read in a rush. So first up we have Ask for Andrea by Noelle W. Ihli. I found this one really good. So we're following 3 different points of view, 3 different perspectives of women who were killed by the same man. He's went on dates with them after meeting up with them, 2 of them on a dating website and 1 of them in real life, and he's murdered all 3 of them. And we're following their ghosts as they come to terms with their murder and with the trickery, and as they also then decide to try and stop him and to get him arrested for what he's done. It's a really quick read and obviously talks a lot about trusting people that you meet online, about the prevalence of date raping, about the ease of getting these drugs, and also about domestic abuse. And I think that this was really well done. I don't want to say I enjoyed it because of the topic, but I was very happy to continue picking the book up each day. And yeah, I think this is fantastic. If you're wanting to read a thriller, then I recommend this one. Give it a go. On a very different note, but still involving crimes, and that is Careless People by Sarah Wynn-Williams. And this is a non-fiction all about her time working at Facebook and the shit that they got up to. This is wild. This is absolutely wild. On some levels it is unsurprising because corporate America is shit, and some of this is very much just that. Some of it, on the other hand, is very much not, and I can see why Facebook did not want this to be published. I think that Sarah herself did not help herself in this. She was working whilst she was in a hospital bed after having just almost died, and she was still expected to work. The sexual harassment was just like ignored, like literally they did not care. They cared more that she was bringing it up. But then also, Facebook specific, the fact that they did not help in the slightest with everything that was happening in Myanmar, even though they were the catalyst for a lot of that. The fact that they were actively lying to various different people about what they were doing in China. This is an interesting book. It's well written in that it's a memoir and it goes through Sarah's life, and you do have that interspersed to kind of keep you emotionally gripped, but it also does tell you about Facebook's growth and about how the timeline changed as the years went on. I think this is a very good book and I'm glad I got to pick it up. Entirely different vibes now, and we have A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. This was the most difficult of the books for me to read, trying to shove this in 1 week. If you're picking this up, if you naturally read it that fast, that's wonderful, but I don't recommend trying to force yourself to read it this quickly. I went into this blind. I bought the pretty duology because I'd heard so much about the series and I knew nothing, so I didn't know it was a space opera. And I'm like, I can read 140 pages of that along with 50 pages of 5 other books. No problem. It was difficult. There's a lot going on here. There is so much depth, world building, character building, learning about different species and about different races, and there's a lot. And I really liked it. I think this is really, really good, and I'm excited for the second book in the duology, and I'm wondering what's going to happen in it. We get some really cool and interesting technology, we get political intrigue, and we also get a really good relationship dynamic and build up. I really liked this and I can see why everyone loves it. I think it's going to be a 4.5 for me, so not quite a 5-star, but I had a good time. In this we are following a young woman who's been chosen to be the new ambassador for her station, for this main planetary country. People? I'm good at this. And it's because her predecessor was suddenly dead and everyone is convinced that he's been murdered because apparently he died from an allergen, but he'd lived on this planet for like 30 years and he knew what he could and couldn't eat. And so there's the intrigue of that. There's also a technological side of things going on because they have technology that allows you to implant memories of a deceased person into a living person's brain, and that has went wrong because of the murder. And then there's the political intrigue of the planet itself and all the mess that's going on there. And then there's also the interpersonal relationships between our main character, our new ambassador, and the woman who is helping her and is her like envoy that opens the doors and sets up the interviews and things. And it's their developing relationship, and it talks a lot about colonisation and about barbarianism, and it's just so, so well done. Penultimate, and we're sticking with sci-fi but a bit different, and this is Goldilocks by Laura Lam. This one was so good. This is so good. So we are following one woman predominantly, but eventually 5 women who end up going up in a rocket, and they are attempting to reach a habitable planet that we've seen that's far off and they're going to have to fly to for a long time in space. You might think that's the interesting bit. It's not. They stole the spacecraft because the world was getting progressively more right-leaning and women weren't supposed to have jobs. But these 5 women had trained to go into space, they were good at this, they had the skills needed for this length of spaceflight, and so with the help of a leader, they end up essentially stealing the rocket and going themselves. Whilst we have our point of view as just one person, which is Naomi, we see her from different points of time, so both on the ship, just before going on the ship, and also a few years ago, and so you really get the experience of someone telling a story to you and explaining why things are relevant and how things led to one another. And I really enjoyed this. It's a good discussion on, it came out in like September, October of 2020. It's a good discussion on pandemics, because that's in here too, but also on sexism, on totalitarianism, on the intention behind utopias, and on spaceflight, which is, in my opinion, done very well. I don't know too much about it, but it all seems accurate to me, and everything that is untrue is theoretically possible. She's not just made it up, she's went with what people and scientists have decided is probably how we're going to do it, even if we can't do it yet. And I just was so engrossed in this. It was really well written, I was really enjoying it. There was interpersonal tension, the science behind it with scientific issues going wrong, and I just think this is fantastic, and I can't believe it took me this long to read. I know that both Caitlin and Eleanor are going to be very happy that I finally read this one. I believe that this one was actually gifted to me by Caitlin, but recommended to me by Eleanor. I think that's the way around. Thank you very much to both of you. And then a book that was gifted to me by Carrie, and that is Start a Villain by John Scalzi. She gifted this to me after I enjoyed When the Moon Hits Your Eye. Like a big pizza pie, that's amore. I feel like it's the law that I have to do that. There are talking cats. In this book we follow a man named Charlie. He's recently divorced and he's trying to work as a substitute teacher, but he's struggling to make ends meet. And then his long estranged Uncle Jake dies, and it turns out that he is the only relative left, and Uncle Jake wants him at the funeral. This leads him into a world of spies and villains, with talking cats, communicating dolphins, a volcano for a lair, and I just found it so fun. Just such a fun ride. I was thinking until about here that I needed a sequel, but the way that Scalzi wraps it up is so well done. And I still kind of want a sequel. There's a short story at the end that is following the cat's perspective. I need more of that. But this was just so fun, so silly, such a great time, and I'm very grateful to Carrie. Thank you for sending me this, because, it's stupid, but so fun. And that was my August reading. It is the biggest reading month I've had so far this year in terms of page count. So, yeah, that was... My camera died. Rude. That was stressful, and I'm not doing it again in September. But I did have a great month. I read a lot of fantastic books. Please let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of them. I want to talk about them. This is why I have this stupid channel in the first place. But also, if any of them were or are now on your TBR and you want to know anything more about them, please leave it down in the comments below, because I love talking books. Thank you so much for watching, folks, and I will see you, hopefully, in the next video. Bye!